Okay, this is revision session 4. It's all about life in Nazi Germany. We're going to start with religion. Okay, so Hitler really wanted to reduce the church's power. He saw, just like not quite so much as communism and Judaism, he saw the church as being a threat to his control of Germany, because if you're a Catholic, your first allegiance is to the Pope and not to the head of state. So what he tried to do was squeeze the church out. Now, what he did first of all, with the Enabling Act, he signed something with the Pope called the Concordat. So that was like the first deal that he made with the church, the Catholic Church. And the Concordat was basically saying to the Pope, if you don't stick your nose in my business, I won't stick my nose in yours. Now, eventually the Pope came to regret the Concordat and wrote a pamphlet called With Burning Anxiety, which was an attack on Hitler and Nazism. But by then it was too late. Hitler was already a dictator. But in Hitler's rise to power, the Concordat was a deal between the Nazis and the Catholics. After that, what Hitler tried to do was marginalize Christianity. Okay, he tried to kind of squeeze it out. Anybody who opposed Hitler was put in a concentration camp, and quite a lot of people who opposed Hitler did so on religious grounds. So there's a few famous people that are worth knowing. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, B-O-N-H-O with an umlaut, double F-E-R, Bonhoeffer. I think I might have spelled that wrong actually. Might only be one F. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian minister who opposed Hitler and ended up being executed in the final days of World War II in a concentration camp. He tried to smuggle people out of tried to smuggle Jews out of Germany, and ended up being arrested. He did so on Christian grounds, so he tried to oppose Nazism as a Christian. And also Martin Niemöller. Okay, N-I-E-M-O-L-L-E-R. He also opposed Hitler. He survived the war. He survived his time in a concentration camp. He wrote a famous poem opposing the Nazis. So there were Christians who did use their religion to oppose Hitler. The other thing that Hitler did, as well as kind of squeezing out Christianity, was he tried to set up something called the Reich Church, R-E-I-C-H Church. Now that was basically it's like a parody of religion, really, where the crucifix was replaced with a swastika. The idea of God and Jesus was replaced with Hitler himself, and the Bible was replaced with Mein Kampf. So the Reich Church was kind of like a pseudo-Christian organization, the idea being that the Nazis were trying to steal believers from the actual church. Okay? He wanted basically to make people comply with Nazi ideals and laws. However, this wasn't very successful. At its height, the Reich Church only had about 2,000 pastors or priests, whereas the opposing church, actual Christian church, led by people like Martin Niemöller, had 6,000 pastors. So there was far more. Try and keep those numbers in mind. 2,000 ministers for the Reich Church, 6,000 ministers for Protestant church. So it didn't work, basically. Okay. So the Catholic Church was persecuted, suppressed. Any Catholics who spoke out were put in concentration camps. So it ended up being that anyone who was a Christian was too scared to speak out against him. The Nazis tried to control the Protestant church. The Reich Church Nazified Christianity, as I've said, Mein Kampf in place of the Bible and all the rest of it. But it didn't really work because, as I've said, the oppositional church to the Reich Church was something called the Confessional Church, and they had more ministers than the Nazis did. Okay, so overall, Hitler and the Nazis' attempts to control religion had mixed success, not really a great deal of success. But in the short term, with the Concordat, it was successful in helping him achieve power. Okay, so we'll leave in religion, and we'll move on to opposition to the Nazis in more general terms. Okay, so there were German people who opposed Hitler and tried to stop him, did what they could. It was difficult because obviously Hitler very successfully divided all opposition by removing all political parties apart from the Nazis. But some individuals did. I've mentioned Martin Niemöller. He founded the Confessing Church, or the Confessional Church, as I've mentioned. He preached against the Nazis. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, it is double F, yeah, I've just seen it written down, it is double F. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, B-O-N-H-O with an umlaut, double F-E-R. And he ended up being executed. There were other people as well. Clemens August von Galen was the Catholic Bishop of Munster, who used his sermons to protest against the Nazis' persecution of Jews. And the Nazis really wanted to execute August von Clement, but they needed the support of German Catholics, so that kind of saved his life, really. Other organisations that opposed Hitler had some mixed success, but really sort of fringe things, really. You'll remember the Edelweiss Pirates, guys who kind of opposed the Hitler Youth organisations. They helped army deserters and handed out anti-Nazi leaflets. There were different groups of Edelweiss Pirates. That's kind of like a kind of catch-all name for them, but there were others. The Swing Kids, or the Swing Youth. They used to get in fights with Hitler Youth members, drinking alcohol and listening to swing music. Mostly more of an irritant to the Nazis than a serious opposition. But some of them were executed. Some of them tried, I think they successfully murdered the head of the secret police in Cologne. I think I've got that city right. It might be worth checking that. But they were executed for it. So it is true that several members of Edelweiss Pirates were executed for their anti-Nazi activities. Okay. But generally speaking, it was low-level stuff. Other organisations that opposed the Nazis, there's the White Rose organisation. That was Hans and Sophie Scholl, S-C-H-O-L-L. Hans and Sophie Scholl were executed for handing out anti-Nazi leaflets. And there's Colonel von Stauffenberg, S-T-A-U-F-F-E-N-B-E-R-G, who is memorably played by Tom Cruise in the film Valkyrie. It's a true story, trying to blow Hitler up, but it failed. So there were Germans who opposed it, but obviously they failed. Ultimately, Hitler's grip on Germany through terror and propaganda was very strong. Okay, so leaving opposition behind, we'll move on to work and home. You all know that the Nazis encouraged women to have lots of babies, so all those liberalising measures that the Weimar government undertook to give women the vote and allow them to have jobs on an equal footing with men, that was all undone, and women were basically told the perfect German woman has no makeup, is strong, and has lots of children. So women were sent back into the home. The key term or policy term is Kinderkirche, which is children, church and kitchen. Kinderkirche. And the organisation that was set up to promote this was the League of German Maidens, which is a kind of Hitler Youth organisation for women. They encouraged young ladies to have to prepare for having lots of children, and to look for Aryan husbands and look after those Aryan husbands and their children by being very good cooks and all the rest of it. And the Nazis promoted this by giving financial aid. They gave loans to married couples, and the more children they had, they were allowed to keep that money and not have to pay it back. They also gave out bronze, silver and gold stars, depending on the number of children they had, so it's worth remembering that. The Bronze Star for Motherhood, which was given out, was awarded every year on Hitler's mother's birthday. A big symbolic thing about, breeding the next generation of Nazi soldiers. And this was very successful. Women who couldn't find a husband were encouraged to sign up and be impregnated by a member of the SS, so that the next generation of children would hopefully be good, strong Germans and ready to carry on the fight. Okay, women were also banned from being lawyers and doctors and other professions that were seen as respectable jobs for men. So that was women under Nazi Germany. The next section, public works and rearmament and unemployment. Hitler started a huge program of public works. Yet the question here is really, were people better off under the Nazis? And the jury's out, really, because for a lot of working class people, they were. You cannot argue that the Nazis did create jobs. These public works programs, building autobahns on motorways. All men between 18 and 25 could be recruited into the National Labour Service. Military conscription, building up the army, the armaments industry, military industry, meant that there were lots of jobs around. It was a good time to find it. And also, of course, women weren't allowed to have jobs. Women were, or at least discouraged from having jobs, so they were working at home, being homemakers. So yeah, unemployment did fall. It was not a bad time to be a young working class man, really. Unemployment was back down to pre-Wall Street crash levels. But we've also got hidden unemployment. How realistic was this? How accurate was this? We'll come to that in a minute. We must remember also that trade unions were banned. Workers had to join the Nazis' Labour Front. That's the name of it, the Labour Front. It was just the one trade union, and obviously it was a Nazi organisation. They weren't allowed to go on strike for better conditions or higher wages. So although unemployment did fall, in real terms it did fall, wages and living conditions didn't really go up. That said, many groups within society did feel better off. The Nazis promoted this idea of Volksgemeinschaft. That's a lovely key word that you really need to use, Volksgemeinschaft. The exam board seems to be making a big deal of this, so I'd like you to all make sure you use it. Volksgemeinschaft is spelled Volksgemeinschaft, Volksgemeinschaft, and it means a community of people working towards the same aims. Okay, so the idea was that they get all of the German people working towards a stronger Germany, and that's what they wanted from the working people. So a lot of workers felt better off. They were in full employment. They were also encouraged to feel valued through strength, through joy, which provided cheap holidays and leisure activities, and the Beauty of Labour scheme, which encouraged factory owners to improve conditions for the workers. The Volkswagen, people's car, was introduced. People would be able to put money away and save up to have the people's car, the VW Beetle, the Volkswagen, although in the end production was shelved in order to make weapons and tanks and things like that, so nobody ever actually got a VW car, but the aspiration was there and people felt good about having it. Many members of the middle classes also felt better off. Small business owners were able to advance more in society than previously. But, and here's the but, right, okay, the cost of living rose by 25%, but wages didn't. So in real terms, people were actually poorer. Workers didn't have the right to strike because they were all members of the Labour Front, not their own trade unions. Small businesses had to pay high taxes. And also, I mentioned this invisible unemployment. Women were taken out of the unemployment figures. Jews were taken out of the unemployment figures. Men aged between 18 and 25 who were recruited into the National Labour Service were taken out of those unemployment figures. So really the unemployment figures weren't as low as they read. But let's not take away from the fact that, yes, more jobs were created, okay? So were things better off was life better for people under Nazi Germany? No, not really. Statistically, it might seem that way because unemployment fell, but statistically also real wages fell because the cost of living went up. And also they weren't allowed to campaign for better wages because they were all forced to join the Labour Front and so on. So no, people weren't really better off. Okay. So leaving that behind, we'll move on to youth movement, or young people in Nazi Germany. Youth movements. Hitler very quickly cottoned on to the fact that the young people were the future, and he set up the Hitler Youth in 1926. All boys aged 14 and over were recruited into the movement, and it became compulsory after 1936, okay? That's important. It became compulsory after 1936. It was very militaristic. It It promoted militarism and preparing young men for war. High-achieving boys could be sent to Hitler schools to be trained as Nazi leaders. It was fun. A lot of working-class lads enjoyed it. You know, they were getting out into the countryside, camping and going on adventures. It was good for a lot of kids. Although it got worse as the war progressed after 1939, because those leaders of the youth movements who were good and effective were recruited into the army, and it ended up being run by the children themselves, and it started to unravel and it deteriorated later on. League of German Maidens for girls, and I've mentioned that, how it promoted getting girls ready for being housewives. So I'll not go into that again. Education across Germany was Nazified. We've talked about all Nazi teachers had to be members of the Nazi Party, the Nazi Teachers Association. Children were expected to report on teachers who did not toe the party line. Subjects were rewritten to fit in with Nazi ideas. Children were taught to be anti-Semitic. Eugenics was taught in lessons. That's a nice key word, EUGENICS. Eugenics, teaching the science of breeding out genetic defects and racial imperfections. Physical education became about getting ready for war. Maths became about the trajectory for bombing runs and things like that. All Jewish teachers were banned from schools, and any Jewish textbooks and what have you, or books that were written by Jews, I should say, were burned and things like that. Every child had to say Heil Hitler at the start of every day. It was all about getting the kids ready for war, getting the kids to toe the party line. So don't forget your education. Also, the sexes were split up. So girls were taught home economic types, getting ready for being a mum, and boys were kind of prepared for war. When the Second World War broke out, a lot of Hitler Youth were drafted towards the end of the war. A lot of the Hitler Youth were drafted into the war. In the final days of World War II, members of the Hitler Youth were fighting on the streets alongside adults. They were known to be the most fanatical fighters because they had really been brainwashed from a very young age. And it took a lot of post-war work to fix that. So that's young people. Let's go on. Final bit, Nazi discrimination. Hitler wanted to cleanse Germany of inferior groups. Now, the thing here is how it got worse. It got progressively worse. So we start off in 1933 with a national boycott of Jewish businesses. And this led to increased violence against Jews, but in a very kind of ad hoc way. Well, it wasn't sort of legally sanctioned. Yes, Molly.
Was that when a Jew shot someone in Paris embassy?
Are you talking about the backlash against that, which was Kristallnacht in 1938? You might be. I'll come on to that, so I'll leave that for now. So in 1933, it was just a boycott. Okay. Over time, the number of jobs that Jews were allowed to do was reduced. So many Jews were removed from the civil service, removed from the legal profession, removed from medicine, and then in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed. So you need that. The Nuremberg laws. It gets worse, right? With the Nuremberg laws, Jews were officially biologically different from other Germans. They lost a lot of the legal rights that other Germans were allowed to have. They stopped Jews from being citizens. It banned marriage between Jews and non-Jews and banned sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jews. Okay, so the Nuremberg laws were a big turning point. Jews were later forced to close or sell their businesses. In 1938, we have Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass. Also in 1930, insult to injury, German Jews were forced to clean that up to pay for the cost of the damage that was caused by this kind of 2-day binge of violence against the Jewish population, where synagogues and businesses were destroyed. Jews were no longer allowed to enter public places. And a lot of sort of localities started to compete to become the most anti-Semitic. Remember, Gauleiters were given a little bit of autonomy in the way that they organised localities. So in some cities, Jews were banned from parks, had special benches that only they were allowed to sit on, lest they sit on the ones for ordinary Germans. Kristallnacht was a real turning point in the Nazi persecution of Jews. It was the first widespread act of anti-Jewish violence And after Kristallnacht, things got even worse. Eventually, they were forced into the ghettos. They were forced to give up their homes and forced into the ghettos. And after 1942, something called the Wannsee Conference, W-A-N-N-S-E-E, the Wannsee Conference, that was when we get the final solution, which is a euphemistic term for extermination. That's when they were sent to death camps. This was the official policy, to kill Jews. It wasn't just Jews, last point we need to make. It was also Romani gypsies, Slavs, homosexuals, people of mixed race were also sterilized. Originally they were made to wear badges, coloured badges. So, for example, homosexuals were forced to wear pink triangles. Jews, were forced to wear yellow stars. And in 1936, Hitler, who was the head of the SS, began the Central Office for the Combating of Homosexuality and Abortion. So they were dead serious about this. They were. The final thing is anyone with a mental or physical disability was murdered or sterilized. Okay, so this eugenics, which began being taught in schools, was taken to its logical extreme. That's the facts, folks. That's everything you need to know. The next revision session is going to be on how to answer the questions. So from those last 4, you've got everything you need to know about the 4 sections. And the last one that I'll do next week and stick on YouTube as well will be all about how to answer the questions in depth. Okay?